When it comes to the transgender conversation, outside of staunch conservatives, people who sense that there is something wrong with transgenderism tend to fall into one of two categories. They either just go along with it, as I described in my previous video, or they stay silent, either out of fear or out of lack of knowledge. The fear is that any criticism will result in backlash, condemning them as a bigot or a transphobe, such as what happened to rapper Boosie. Others feel strongly that it is immoral, but just aren't knowledgeable enough on the issue to articulate why it's wrong. In this video, I'm going to react to some people who've joined the conversation, and then in a follow-up video, I'm going to share the information that I believe everyone who decides to enter the trans conversation should have beforehand. I've broken down the information into 4 points. They are dysphoria, desistance, detransition, and Dr. Money. So if you familiarize yourself with those 4 terms, you'll have plenty of information to reject the trans agenda. But I'll be breaking all of that down in my next video. I'm approaching this like one video, but I don't want it to be too long, so that's why I'm breaking it up. Before I get into my commentary, I want to show 2 clips. The first one is from the weekly show Politicking with Jason Whitlock, which is posted on Tuesdays on the Scoon TV YouTube channel. If you aren't familiar with Whitlock, he's a sports columnist who previously hosted the Fox sports show Speak for Yourself, which he dubbed the most fearless sports show on television. He left Fox and became a partner at Outkick, where he hosted a show called Fearless. So he's someone who prides himself on going against the grain to express unpopular opinions, particularly regarding racial and social justice narratives. But when the topic of Xayah Wade came up, I thought the host, Curtis Scoon, was on point, but Whitlock seemed apprehensive to speak truly and freely on the issue.
Michelle Obama has a podcast. She's going to interview Dwayne Wade's, his child.
There you go.
His child is 12 years old. To me, every high-profile black person on the left is deeply involved in what can be called the social engineering of the black community.
The suicide rate for kids with alternative sexual lifestyles or feelings is very high. As pro-masculinity as I am, there are young people that just come out of the womb and they're just men that just aren't very masculine. And maybe there are women that come out of the womb just not very feminine.
And I just want to clarify that Whitlock's statement, that theory or outlook is actually inconsistent with the transgender theory and transgenderism. They believe that if a male is feminine, then his gender is female. And if a female is masculine, then her gender is male.
I'm not sure as a parent if I would be comfortable with my child being put out there on Front Street and trying to be the face of it. But I guess somebody's got to do it. And that's what Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle Union have signed up for. I don't want to come off as a bigoted Neanderthal. And I'm not saying that you are or we are at all, but I do think there's some good intentions.
Everyone is entitled to their own stance, but he tiptoed around criticizing the Wades out of fear of coming across like a quote-unquote bigot or Neanderthal. That's something to watch out for. While Whitlock is a conservative, he actually utilized a so-called progressive tactic there. They often try to shame their political opponents as regressive, stuck in their ways, or on the wrong side of history. They operate from the presupposition that change is always good and that the future will always be better than the past. I personally didn't watch Xayah on the Michelle Obama podcast, but I saw a short clip on the Woke Progressive channel that I found to be very revealing. Listen closely to this clip and see if you pick up on the same thing I noticed.
Yes, I actually did want to talk to you about, I wanted to ask you one question about your book, which, by the way, I have read and I love it. Fine. And yes, so I wanted to ask you, what advice do you have for teens who want to be themselves and thrive like you have and currently are?
Well, like you have and currently are, you know? I am just so proud of you, you know, being just an amazing role model and embracing your truth, right?
Did you hear that answer? That little boy said, what advice do you have for teen role models? Now, Michelle Obama could have said, work hard in school, obey your parents, do the right thing, don't do drugs. But what did Michelle Obama say? What was the one out of the millions of possible answers that Michelle Obama could have given in that instance? What was the answer that Michelle Obama decided to give? Michelle Obama said, do like you did, Xayah Wade. Do like you did, little boy. I think teens should look at you as a role model. Appalling. Let's take a look at some more of this.
You're already doing this, so maybe this is for some other young people that are listening. But let me just it does take time to know what your self is.
Now, while the former First Lady was busy praising this 12-year-old, Xayah stated, "I feel I need help." Xayah asked for advice on how to be oneself and thrive. Michelle basically said, "You don't need advice, you've got it all figured out." And she didn't even hear that subtle cry for help. And this happens often. People uplift a supposedly marginalized group because it's a good look to do so. But some people don't need affirmation, they need help. And that's one thing Xayah got right. Also, the talking points that people always bring up regarding transgenders are the suicide rate and violence or hate crimes committed against them. Of course, both are unfortunate realities, but a lot of assumptions are made with these reports. First of all, if we can agree that suicide is generally an irrational action, then that further suggests that suicidal people are suffering from a disorder or delusion. But instead of examining those suffering, we are to assume that the problem is with those of us who aren't suffering. And that's not to suggest that environment has no effect on the suicide rate, but today it's often assumed to be the only cause. Secondly, violent crimes are perpetrated from within demographics more often than they are perpetrated by outsiders. But when someone who happens to be LGBT+ is victimized, the media often assumes that they must have been a target of hate from a straight person, when there's reason to suspect that the perpetrator could also be LGBT. It's difficult to find data to prove it, but of course, not all LGBT people are out, so to speak. And protecting one's sexuality is often a reason for violence in the first place. Besides that, the divorce rate is higher amongst the LGBT, and it's speculated that domestic incidents are more common amongst the LGBT, particularly the Ls. Thirdly, while the suicide rate is high amongst transgenders, that includes post-op transgenders. Transgenders are convinced that their struggles stem from being in the wrong body. So if they receive medical assistance to get the right body and their problems persist, they're left to face the reality that what they perceive to be an external problem was actually an internal problem. And instead of treating that internal problem, they just created another one.